Welcome back to a double edition of Why Blank Lost. And no, I am not going to say it's part one of the Why Blank Lost finale because that is just silly marketing. I'm David
That's
Bloomberg,
fair.
and joining me for the penultimate time this season is, of course, my co host, Jessica Lewis.
Hello, everyone. I am here. And yes, it would be interesting if we just maybe we could have a little teaser at the end. Maybe we don't tell them what our predictions are.
No, of course we have to tell them what our predictions are.
Come on. You know how I feel about those.
I know, I know.
Anyway, because my predictions was I half right or completely? Maybe I was half right.
Well, I
Half
was
right.
completely right
You
because
were. I know you were completely
I
right.
said Andy and Genevieve would be voted
Yes,
out,
you
and that's
did.
exactly what happened.
That is exactly what happened.
I,
I
I
said Sam
mean,
and Genevieve.
I mean, I,
So
I say exactly, but I kind of predicted them in reverse order. But, let's not be nitpickers
I
when it
mean,
comes to giving me
really,
credit.
do the details really matter?
No, I don't think so. I mean, if for calling myself correct, no, details don't matter.
No, no, I guess not. So, yeah, but we do have a lot to discuss because we do have two rather larger than life players to talk about, right?
Yes,
These were
yes,
some
we do.
serious players this season. So it's gonna be a long one, I'm guessing. Long one.
I think it'll be a little long. I think some things will end up, I mean, like we had some people online saying, can you do one for each of them? No, sorry. It's
Apologies.
yeah, it was a lot just for both of us, more Jessica than me, to be ready for one podcast, let alone two. And I know you might think, well,
Yeah.
if you're doing two on the same people, isn't it the same? There's more to it than that. So, we have to
Yes.
change shirts. We have to, it's a whole thing.
It's a
Um,
whole thing.
you know, but because it is multiple people, yes, it will be slightly shorter. We won't go into as many details with each of them, but come on, we know the details on. I'm not. We're not going to leave out anything important. Let's put it that
Right,
way.
right.
Um,
Yes.
and of course, we will still follow our usual path of comparing their games to my rules for winning that I originally wrote way back after season one and have been updating ever since, using all the non spoiler information available to us from what we saw on TV, interviews, social media, and secret scenes.
Mhm.
And of course, the newest version can be found at robhasawebsite.com/yxlostfeed. Scroll down, click on the link bubble for the Survivor rules.
Mhm.
But before we address how Andy and Genevieve did in terms of the rules, we always have some other things to discuss from the episode. Now, normally lately, I've been using most of the time in this section to talk about Andy. But
Right.
obviously, we'll mostly, be talking about Andy later.
Mhm.
But there is one thing I wanted to revisit. I actually mentioned it last week. And when I mentioned it last week, I was talking about what I had said 5 weeks earlier, which was, back after episode 7, I said there was a reason we saw the scene with Andy and Genevieve agreeing to work together. And I
Mm.
figured it would mean that they would go far into the game together. And they did. What I
Mhm.
didn't know was it would also be that they went out of the game kind of
Right.
together.
Right. Yeah. Well, you were half right there.
Yeah. Yeah. So, well, moving away from those two for a few minutes, let me just say what we saw this week. This is why you keep your idol a secret.
Oh my word, right? This was such incredible gameplay by Rachel, and I really truly appreciate the fact that nobody knew. Nobody knew, so
Right.
much so that Andy damned himself because he
Shh,
didn't
not
know
yet.
that
Shh,
she
shh, shh, shh. Not
Sorry,
yet.
I'm jumping ahead. But yes, this is why you don't tell people that you have an idol.
Yeah, she
100%.
she gained so much information and power in the game
Mhm.
simply by not telling anyone about her idol.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yes.
yeah, she eventually told Sue, but that wasn't an issue. Um, because she was so secretive and a good actress,
Mhm.
everybody told her they were voting her out.
Right.
Um, you know, Andy even talked to Dalton Ross about how she was crying these tears of frustration. And she had
Yes.
this big, very defeated atmosphere, a very defeated mood at camp during the entire scramble. I- it just, she was so good at playing her role
Yeah.
of, oh, this is my funeral. Oh, this is so terrible.
Mhm.
Uh,
Yeah.
And then on top of it, because everyone told her exactly what they were doing, she didn't have the worry that most people with idols have of, should I play it now or should I play it next time? Should I hold it or, and risk going home with it in my pocket or use it
Mhm.
in vain?
Right.
No,
Right.
I
Yes,
mean,
there was no question.
yeah.
Well,
Um,
and I do think that it's interesting that she went to such lengths to be convincing that she didn't have an idol, because oftentimes we hear players talk about how, oh, well, so and so isn't really acting concerned, and that's concerning me because
mhm,
they should know that they're being the target, that they're the targeted individual tonight, and they're the person that we're considering voting out, and they're just not acting that sad or
mhm,
frustrated. And so she went that extra step and
right.
really convinced everybody, not just by her words, but her actions and her mannerisms. Full circle. I mean, just incredible player all around for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Every future player of Survivor should see what Rachel did and relearn an important
Mm,
lesson from it because
yeah.
that used to be a lesson that people knew and then it got unlearned.
Yes. Kind of like keeping secrets.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
crazy. It's
Yeah.
like she's bringing back some old school
I know.
skills. I love this. New
Now,
era meets old school.
yes. The other item I wanted to bring up was Tini's vote at the second tribal council. There were a lot of questions about it, right after the episode itself. And in the end, it seemed a little strange that Tini appeared to be pushing to vote out Genevieve, but then was the second Sam vote instead.
Mm,
Now, I suspected right away that Tini voted Sam because, well, that was the safer vote. Genevieve might or might not have had an idol, but there was
mm-hmm.
zero hint that Sam had one. So
Right.
at worst, if Genevieve didn't have an idol, oh well, Sam goes home. But if
Right.
Genevieve did have an idol, well then Teeny would have been the target.
Yeah, and
You
I
know,
think it's interesting though that she was worried about being like the backup vote, I guess, if there was was there a true concern that Teeny had that she might be the other name that's being put down if an idol is played?
it should have been Teeny's concern. Um, I mean, obviously they knew Rachel was safe. They didn't know Sue was safe.
Right.
But that turned out to be the case. Um,
Mhm.
Then Teeny said on Twitter after the episode, I knew Rachel and Sue were voting Genevieve and put one on Sam just to make sure. Was planned. Now,
Mm. Mhm.
okay, I do have to say, for something that was planned, Teeny spent an awful lot of time hemming and hawing about it in the voting booth.
She did, didn't
Uh,
she?
but the end,
Just 30 seconds. I just need
yeah,
30
yeah,
seconds.
yeah.
That's
The
all.
end result matches, what I thought.
Right.
Um, if Teeny knew Rachel and Sue were voting Genevieve and it had all been a master plan by Sam and Genevieve to fool them, then presumably Sam and Genevieve would have both been voting Teeny anyway, and Teeny's one vote wouldn't have mattered. So I'm not really I mean, the
Well,
only
that's
time it
why
would
I'm
have
I'm
helped,
curious.
well, the only time it would have helped would be if Genevieve was pulling the wool over everyone's eyes, including Sam,
Mm.
and she voted Teeny while Sam voted Genevieve. So there were
Mm.
these individual votes firing around. Very
Was the
low
block
chance of
vote
happening.
was the block a vote the first time?
That was the first time, so that
That
wasn't
was
in
the first
play.
time?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Mhm.
this was a very low chance of happening, but I guess it still makes sense for Teeny to protect against even low chance of something happening.
Sure. Yeah. It's interesting when you kind of work through the permutations and how the votes could land and could fall, and when people are like, she has an idol, doesn't have an idol, it's fake, it's
Mhm.
not fake, and I think that that can stir up more paranoia and make people start thinking through almost like a conspiracy theory, like you just said.
Right.
We're like, oh, but if this happens and then that, and then
Yeah.
maybe so one vote here could make all the difference, because there is an unknown factor, because there is this idol that people are discussing and whether or not it's real or fake.
Hmm.
And there's questions surrounding that too. So I could see why she was probably a little more spun up in her brain, just because of all of that was going on.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, do you have anything or anyone else you want to discuss before we get to the rules?
Mm, I don't think so. I think it
Okay.
was an incredibly enjoyable episode yet again. I
Hmm.
really do love how this season is coming together, and I am very impressed with the level that the players are at this point in the game so
Hmm.
far in. It feels like they're really thinking through all
Yes.
the avenues and all of the potential things that could happen. Just very impressive gameplay. So I'm
Yes.
very excited to see how it all ends up. Oh, but I do want to mention too, I should say Rachel's spying. That was
Oh,
fantastic.
yes. Yes.
That was great. And she is completely correct. It is so dark out there. You cannot see a damn thing at
Right.
all. And they warn you, like, you don't necessarily believe it the first night you're out there,
Yeah,
but all the
we've
crew was
talked
like,
about this
listen,
before
yeah.
because I think it goes back to Carson having planned to, oh, I'm going to run off in the middle of the night, like,
Mm-hmm.
and search for idols, and then he gets out there and he's like, you can't see anything in the middle of the
You
night,
can't see anything at
you
all.
know.
No, it is so,
And
so
then
dark. So,
even Rome
yeah.
said it at the beginning of in this preseason, said something
Mhm.
similar.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it was an interesting or a fun camera decision to just go pitch black,
Yes. Oh,
to
yes, I
show
loved that.
a few
Mhm.
seconds of pitch black.
Mhm.
I mean, there must be a tiny bit of starlight, or else how did she even feel herself to the the bush? But very, very tiny. So,
Yes, and it there is a very small amount. Your
mhm,
eyes do adjust when you're out there, but it is not it's not what you would necessarily expect, because there is no, like,
right.
unnatural light, right?
Yeah.
It's only starlight, and it that's only so bright, right? So it is very dark. There's a lot of trees, so that's not helping the light situation. But also there is something to be said about becoming familiar with the area itself,
Mhm.
because there are paths, so there are areas that you would know to necessarily walk on. So you would know what are safe places to go. And if she's following voices, they had to get there too, right? So
Right.
I'm sure they're not going too far away from
Right.
the camp, because they can't see either. So I would imagine that that probably helped her find them. But just really just a fantastic moment as well, that she was using all of the tools in the toolbox in this
Yes.
episode. So it was very
Yes.
nice to watch.
Yeah.
Very enjoyable.
All right. Well, there were, of course, other things going on. I'll be putting them on my YouTube shorts at David Bloomberg TV. Already have a couple things up there, like Tini getting drunk and spilling, the beans that weren't really spilling the beans
This is
because,
for Teeny.
yeah, yes, you can call it a martini. Um, and, because even when Tini was accidentally spilling the beans, well, Sue already knew about the supposed idol from Rachel, and of
Mm-hmm.
course, it wasn't a real idol anyway. So yes, that and another couple already posted. Um,
Nice.
Now, before we get to how Andy and Genevieve did, we do want to mention that the rules we are about to discuss come in a shorter, much more colorful version in poster
Yes.
form,
Very nice.
and it is still on sale for
It is.
20% off. Go to robhasawebsite.com/yxlostfeed, scroll down to the poster, click on it, and order it.
Yes.
And like I said, 20% off. So that makes it only $16 plus the shipping cost.
Mm-hmm.
Our shipping department has been going crazy to make sure these get out. But as we record
I'm
this,
trying my hardest.
there's less than 2 weeks till the holidays. So uh, if you want to get one by the holidays, by all means, hurry up.
Get on it.
Yeah.
So the shipping department can get them out to you.
Yes. Now, of course, there's also the poster on a t-shirt and the checklist on a t-shirt. Now, we do not control the shipping department for these, so I do
No.
not know whether, how much time you have. My advice, again, hurry up.
Just order it.
Just
do
order
it.
it, get it
It's fine.
quickly, and
Listen,
hopefully,
this is the world we live in. You just
Right.
scroll and click and you put it buy now, pay, you're done. It's easy.
That's right. That's right.
Mhm.
So, yeah, there is that, and everybody should hurry up and do that.
And speaking of t-shirts, I still haven't gotten my t-shirt, by the way.
From
That bet that I won.
Oh, okay. We'll have to
Just
address that.
saying.
Wasn't for me, so you can't blame me for that
No.
one. So
I just thought of it the other day. I'm like, I need that t-shirt
yeah,
because I need to be able to wear it. But
yes.
anyway, so
All right. Well, way back at the beginning of the season, I said I didn't think Andy was a Jelinski or a Banu. I thought he was an Emily. And I was right. He even managed to pull off the biggest move of the season to that point and kept his threat level low. But then something changed. Meanwhile, Genevieve was so quiet on her tribe early that we didn't even know she existed for the first few episodes. But when she emerged, she also made some big moves of her own while still staying mostly low on the radar. But as with Andy, something changed. What actions that each of them took suddenly thrust both of them into the spotlight, and not in a good way. How could they have avoided the repercussions that came with it? At RHAP, we know Survivor, and we know why Andy and Genevieve lost. Now, as perhaps a hint at the actions both Andy and Genevieve took, the ones I just mentioned, we're going to shake things up and start with the second rule, which says not to scheme and plot too much and to keep your scheming secret. Both Andy and Genevieve had game-changing issues here.
Yes.
Starting with Andy, well, we saw what happened. And you already jumped ahead and mentioned it.
I am so sorry.
As if it was a big surprise.
Like nobody knew that we were going to talk about that.
That's right.
Spoiler.
He was trying to convince Rachel that he was playing hard and had a good chance to win at the end. And in her own words, as she hugged him goodbye, you were very convincing today, just not in the way you thought.
Yes.
I mean, this was really a battle in his mind, I think, between Appendix B, which we'll still talk about in the end, and this rule 2. Now, Stephen Fishback has been on Blue Sky and then went on Know-It-Alls, trying to make the case that Andy did the right thing because it was a low percentage chance that Rachel would make it through the vote. But Fishback is wrong. They knew there was the possibility of idols being out there. I mean, heck, there were still 2 of them in play at this point. I
feel like they all forgot about that other one, though.
Nobody had played one in the post-merge.
Right. But I feel like they didn't know that there was a second one introduced because that came during the auction. So
they should know that there's at least 1 or 2 idols out there.
Well, sure. One, you can certainly know the red paint idol, who's got the red paint idol.
Right.
But maybe they just didn't think that there would be a second one for whatever reason. And still, the red paint idol was not accounted for at that point.
Right. Yeah. I mean, Steven's argument was that this could have won the game for Andy if she didn't have anything and therefore was indeed going to the jury. And that could be true, but it was only half the equation. The chance that she did have a way out of this was simply too high, much higher than Andy's early calculation that Kyle wouldn't win all the immunity challenges.
Yeah.
And, we just mentioned the red paint idol. At least some of them, if not all of them, knew the story of the red paint, and they had to figure that idol might be out there somewhere. Andy could be pretty sure that Genevieve and Sam didn't have it. That only left 3 other possibilities. Now,
yeah,
I know I credited Rachel's acting job earlier, But Rule 2 addresses almost this exact scenario. It says, as much as players might feel like it's a good idea to let the targets know in case they make it to final three and have to face those previous targets at the jury, the fact of the matter is that it's better to risk it and at least get to the final three rather than giving your target an opportunity to turn the tables. Then you can talk to the jury about how good a player you were and hope they buy it. This is especially true nowadays with the prevalence of so many idols. You never know when your target might have one, and you certainly don't want to let them know they should plan to use it.
Yeah, and I think that this is an interesting little issue in particular to Andy, because I think Andy found himself in a tough spot, and he talked about this in his
Mm-hmm.
exit press, that even though we saw Operation Italy as like, wow, that was an incredible move, and everything that they put together and how impressive it was, it wasn't perceived that same way by Tini or Rachel or Sue,
Right.
because they were just like, "That's Andy flipping." And so I think there was almost this moment of like, Andy had done this incredible thing, and he didn't want to be left with having to justify his game in the final 3. He wanted her to go into the jury and kind of sell his game for him, messing with the jury a little bit, right? Which we've talked about, that people
I mean,
that Ponderosa have a
yeah.
tendency to do this. And so I do feel like he was in a very tough spot, because he was recognizing that they might not see his game for what he believes it should be seen as. So it is a calculated risk. I don't think it was the right call, obviously,
Mm.
because it switched the vote and put it on to Andy, but it was something that I think he was struggling with greatly, and was very concerned with, if he gets to the final 3, he hasn't had a chance to already work the jury. And she, to her credit, called him out on it. Jury management, like,
Yeah.
you're literally like working the jury already.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very big risk to take, but I can see why Andy wanted to do it for sure.
I could see, but the risk just does not. The risk is too high.
Sure.
And that's what I meant earlier when I said it's a battle between the second rule and appendix B,
Right. Yeah.
you
Mhm.
have to decide what you're going to. And I get that Andy wanted to have someone arguing on his behalf in the jury. But here's the other thing. He didn't plan to go to the end with Sam and Genevieve.
Right,
So
and I was just gonna say that you've got Genevieve. If you intend on sending her to the jury, that's your individual right there who's gonna talk about it.
right. I think they would have been honest about who initiated and planned Operation Italy. I don't
Mhm.
think you don't have a situation like a certain unnamed recent season where a certain unnamed juror was mad at a certain finalist and therefore didn't credit that finalist with making moves. These were
Mm.
not people who had like worked closely and were super close friends and would feel the sting
Right.
of betrayal. These were
Right.
people who had played the game. Genevieve in particular specifically talked about keeping emotions out of it, as
Mhm.
as we'll discuss. And I see no reason to suspect that they would have lied to their fellow jurors
Yeah.
about
And
what
I
happened
yeah.
there.
And also, I think it would have given Andy an opportunity to also credit people in the jury, because we've talked about that
Right.
too. It's always nice for someone in the final 3 to recognize the
Mm-hmm.
person who's sitting in the jury box and say, "Hey, because of you, like, I'm here, like, we did this together, we came up with this plan." So you're making them feel better as a player, you're recognizing them, but then you're also talking about what you did, because the last thing that they necessarily would want to do in that moment is kind of poo poo it, like, "Oh, it wasn't that great."
Mm-hmm.
No, yeah, I mean, I was part of it, it was awesome, like,
Right.
we did this. And so I do think that, yes, Sam and Genevieve likely would have said all of the right things for Andy regarding that particular move. Yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing is he didn't even have to necessarily wait till then. He could have dropped hints about it at the next tribal council.
Sure.
I mean, doing it before fire making would be a little risky unless he won that immunity challenge. Um, but he could have done it out. I mean, it always seems, and I don't know, maybe there are restrictions on what they can say, but it seems like after someone loses fire making, Jeff doesn't immediately send them out. He sits them back down and talks to them for a few
Mm,
seconds, and
right.
Andy could have jumped in on that one too.
Sure.
he said in his interviews that, he felt okay telling Rachel about his gameplay, in part because he thought he was so much lower in kind of the threat ranking
Mm-hmm.
compared to Sam that it wouldn't even matter. He figured even with that additional information, if there happened to be an idol, Sam would be the one going out on the bad end of it. And frankly, from the look on Sam's face when Rachel revealed the idol, he thought so too. Um,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Yes. And
but
Andy did not expect it to be Andy.
yeah, but as I quoted Rachel saying, Andy was, just that convincing. She went
Right.
from telling him he had a perception as a nothing burger to determining he was the biggest available threat to vote out.
I know.
She said on the show, Andy is trying to win me over. And then instead, it made her think he was a better option than Sam. Uh, she said, Andy is playing a much better game than anyone is giving him credit for.
Mm-hmm.
And he had fooled her 3 times already.
Yeah. And also another component that she might have been considering is if Andy's in the final 3 and she's in the final 3, the third seat is probably going to be like a Sue, I'm guessing, if this is the permutation that she's put together in her mind, which means Genevieve and Sam are sitting in the jury. And so if they are all included in Operation Italy and if they've been playing with Andy and know the type of game he's been playing, you run the risk of those 2 people voting for Andy. So you know that there's going to be 2 votes going Andy's way instead of your way. Perhaps, that might have been something else that she was thinking about as well in that very moment about how this is all going to play out if he's in the final 3 with her.
To Genevieve, like I said, she had a similar issue. The difference was the response to Andy's situation was immediate, while hers took a few votes before she was fully hit with the repercussions.
Mm.
We've said for weeks now that Genevieve's move against Saul was unnecessary, too early, too big, and too obvious. That's why I've been predicting that she'd go for like 5 weeks. For her part, Genevieve said in interviews that the move against Saul was not too early.
She did say this, yes.
I disagree. Or at least I would say maybe she could be right about the timing, but she needed to do it in a different way that was not so big and so obvious. I mean, she was the one who made it clear that the Saul vote was her move. And then Gabe reinforced that. And it wasn't until after it happened that Genevieve realized, maybe taking credit for the move wasn't the best idea. Or as Gabe said, Genevieve put a huge target on her back with the Saul move.
Yeah.
And she'd been down low till she emerged into that vote. And the problem was she emerged too early.
Well, but she had already kind of done this once, right? And that was when she was working through because we have to go back
The
because the
Roman
first
Keyshawn vote?
yes, so the Roman Keyshawn vote, she had already kind of laid this, excuse me.
So she had already laid the groundwork for that.
Yes. Yes.
But here's the thing, that was when, it was pre-merge.
Sure.
And so there were only a few people there to see it.
Well, right.
And she had kind of, brought those people back together with her again, or at least Tini.
And the reason I bring that up is because maybe, it's like she got a little taste of it, right? And it worked, right? Like I did this with Keyshawn and it was an incredible move. Nobody saw it coming. I was able to bring people together that were not working together. And it was like no harm, no foul, right? She got what she wanted. The vote went the way she wanted. And then she kind of could disappear back into herself for a bit. And so I'm curious if having done it once and it going so well for her and then not having those same repercussions from it, that she might have thought, well, now's my chance because we aren't going to have very many chances to get Saul out. And so I need to do this now because I can see his threat level and I can see everybody likes him and I can see that he's
Mhm.
going to be an issue. And if I don't do this now, then I might not have another chance. And I did that once before on Keyshawn and it worked out okay. So I don't know if maybe it's like she got to try it once and it worked. So she was like, I'm going to do it again.
Yeah, that reminds me, I may have told this story here before. I can't imagine why I would have, but my father tells the story how he had a friend from high school who, in later years, he robbed a bank and he was
Mm.
successful and it was easy. So
Oh
then he went
no.
and robbed a bank
Did it
again
again.
and he got caught,
I got
you
caught.
know?
Yeah. See, this is what I'm saying. So she got away with it the first time and was like, oh, and it felt so great because
Yeah.
she got what she wanted. And then this is, yeah. So unfortunately, I just wonder if maybe that was why she was so willing to put herself out there to do it again because she had done it once.
Yeah, I mean, maybe, the lack of repercussions certainly, could have encouraged that. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, it was just, even if it wasn't too soon, it was too obvious.
Well, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it
Yeah.
wasn't, but I also feel like with the way that Survivor is now being played by this new era and this idea of big move-itis, which we've talked about a lot,
Mhm.
that people feel like they need to have a big move, they need to have something on their resume, even though the discussion is always, oh, now they put a big target on their back,
Right.
and so then they're the next ones that get voted out. People still want to do it. They still want to have that moment.
Mhm.
And I think perhaps in Genevieve's circumstance, I don't know if she was necessarily even thinking, I need a big move. It wasn't like Andy. Andy was like, I need a big move
Right.
because I
Right.
need them to know I'm playing. Genevieve was just like, I need to get him out of here because
Yes.
he's going to end up winning. So she was being more calculated about it, not realizing necessarily that, oh, this is going to be seen as a big move. And Gabe is just going to tell everybody that this was a big
Mhm.
move because Gabe saw it for what it was. So I don't know if her doing it was because she thought she needed it. I think she thought she needed it for the game, period, and then realized afterwards, oh, shoot, that didn't work out necessarily the way I want. In the end, he went home, but now people are looking at me.
And that's the other thing too is I would say it's fairly rare at that point in the game that you have to get a person out right then or else they're going to win. You know,
Sure.
there
Yeah.
were a lot of votes coming up. Saul was not
Mm-hmm.
known as some sort of challenge beast.
Right.
Uh, you know, and what we see is frequently as you get closer to the end, the more someone is like Saul, the more you want to get them out. I
Yeah.
mean, you look at the people who they want to target, and it's like, well, we want to get rid of Caroline. Why? She's too nice and in good with everybody. We want
Right.
to get rid of Sam. Why? Because he had too many connections early on. We want to
Right.
get rid of Rachel. Why? Oh, because I mean, okay, she did win immunities, but she's also very well liked. Those
Right.
are the
Yeah.
people that are going to be the targets anyway. So don't put your whole game life on the line to get rid of one at that exact moment.
Understood. I think that's the way she felt and then
Yeah.
realized later, but she still is convinced it was the right
Yes.
time.
I know. And sorry, Genevieve, but that's why we're here to tell people when they're right and when they're wrong. Usually it's Stephen Fishback, but in this case, it's also her. Now, there was another thing in this rule for Genevieve as well. When she admitted to Tini that the idol was fake.
Mm.
During the show, many of us thought she was using some type of multi-level thinking to kind of like outsmart. There were a lot of Princess Bride gifs posted, and uh, trying to, like making Teeny, Rachel, and Sue question: is it real? Is it fake? Who knows? Turns out no. Genevieve acknowledged in all her interviews, and she kind of apologized. She's like, no, sorry, it wasn't me being brilliant. I was just being honest.
Yeah.
And it was because Teeny's emotional plea got to her. Now,
Mhm.
we'll discuss part of that in Rule 4, but providing that information could have contributed to the outcome of the vote. Or it might not have. It's quite possible that Rachel and Sue would have voted for her anyway, knowing that
Right.
they were both safe. It's literally no risk to either of them.
Right.
So they might have taken that chance. Still not something that Genevieve should have done.
Yes, but I also think she mentioned as well that she was not expecting Sam to throw her under the bus and tell Tini that it was fake.
And I posted this on Blue Sky. I haven't gotten an answer from anyone yet that I saw. Uh, I don't understand her saying this in all the interviews because
Mm,
she said, "Well, I didn't think Sam would be afraid to face me or something like that." And it's like,
yeah.
well, everyone thinks you have an idol. It's 3 against 2. He's the other
Mhm.
one. If they all
Right.
think you have an idol, they're going to vote for him. I don't
Right.
understand. I do not know what she was trying to convey in her interviews when she said that. I don't know if she misremembered where they were in the game at that point or what. I I
Mm,
I do not get what she was saying, especially since there is an Entertainment Weekly secret scene of the two of them talking where Sam pulls her aside and says, "Hey, I'm sorry I had to tell Tini, but it was necessary." And she says, "Oh, I totally get it. I would have done the same thing."
yeah, and she did say that she would have done the same thing, but I also think it's one of those circumstances where it's almost like I don't know what she thought the other option was
Mhm.
really, because there's only so many players left. Whether or not they wanna vote for you or Sam, and we saw, I mean, Teeny put a vote on Sam, so that
Yeah.
did happen, so they can certainly work through the numbers and the votes. So I'm not sure what the plan, even if they thought it was a real idol, what that would necessarily have accomplished for either of them. So there didn't really seem to be a reason to not come
Mhm.
clean by Sam at that moment and say, "Hey, by the way, this is not a real idol."
Yeah.
And for her to tell, I mean, she shouldn't have said anything to Teeny, but she also didn't expect Tina to be asking. So she was like, "Well, she asked. I wasn't expecting it. And so I just said yes."
Yeah. But don't just say yes. Uh
Unless someone wants to be in an
in
alliance
an
with you, and
alliance,
then
yes.
you
Then
say
you
yes.
just say yes. Yes, but
See,
not
there's
not
so many
not when
rules.
they say is your idol fake.
Right,
Then no, don't say yes. Um,
right.
all right. Well, I mentioned that both Andy and Genevieve had similar issues here, but they were in really different portions. They were in different portions of this rule. While
Mm,
Andy didn't keep his scheming secret, Genevieve had some of that, but mostly schemed and plotted too much. However, both of them resulted in people seeing them as bigger threats than they had been prior to that happening. So, with that in mind, let's go crazy this week and skip now to the sixth rule, which warns against being too much of a threat.
look at this guy,
Yeah.
throwing it all out there. I love this. No order,
Yeah.
nothing.
2, 6, 1, 3, 4. Sounds like a football player or something. Uh,
Yes.
now, again, starting with Andy, he had been seen for pretty much the whole game as one of the lowest level threats there.
Yeah.
Part of it was by design, as he understood how the others perceived him, and he played into it after everything that happened those first few days. As he told Mike Bloom, having a low perceived threat level was a feature, not a bug. The
Mm,
problem was that as the end game rapidly approached, he knew he had to change that perception if he had a chance of getting any votes at the end. We
mhm.
discussed this quite a bit last week, and there were a fair number of people then arguing that his move with Operation Italy had increased his threat level too much, such that he'd be immediately targeted after the vote. And the thing is, that didn't happen.
Mm,
We were right in saying he did the correct thing. And in his interviews, he said something similar, that he knew this was the point at which he had to do something to change everyone's perception of him.
mm,
When they got back to camp after that tribal council, the three of them played it off as a happy accident, which further downplayed any potential threat level from him, as you mentioned earlier.
mhm.
He told Dalton Ross, I felt like even in the aftermath of Operation Italy, it didn't even really raise my threat level because the people who were left out didn't understand the details of the move.
Right.
And then as Sam said on the show, he worried he was Rachel's target because she didn't realize how big of a threat Andy was.
Mm,
So, yeah, Andy was absolutely successful when it came to this rule. The problem was he was too successful in terms of his future chances for getting votes if he made it to the end.
Yes. I really do feel like this is such an interesting component to Andy in particular,
Mhm.
because we have seen players who have played under the radar, whose games haven't been obvious and they still end up winning. Erica is someone that we were curious about, and then she
Mhm.
ended up winning. And so it can certainly happen. But Andy was
Well, we
an
weren't curious about Erica. I totally discounted her. I I had I had said, my preview or my prediction for that finale was anyone can win except for Erica. She absolutely can't.
yeah,
Now that was based on an edit read, and that was, the worst editing, one of the worst editing jobs Survivor has ever done for a winner.
yeah.
But
No, I don't
uh,
disagree. Yeah.
yeah,
But I think that in Andy's case, Andy had put himself in a circumstance that was almost untenable, right? Because they had that day 3 issue
hmm,
where he was suffering greatly from heat exhaustion and had the breakdown on the mat.
right,
And so now everyone is perceiving him as this weak player who is not going to be able to get through this game
hmm,
without help and hand holding. And he's realizing that on day 4 that, oh my gosh, this is where I'm at. And he kept referring to it as like my threat level was like mud. It was like dirt. Like, I mean it. And but he took that
hmm,
and recognized it and then used it in his game. So it was very fascinating because he didn't come out and go, "Well, I have to correct this narrative right now and I need to let everybody know that I'm better and stay 4
hmm.
and I'm in a different place." No, he used it to his benefit, which is a fantastic way for someone to play this game and something that we don't necessarily see very often, where you take something that is so bad and so like, oh, this poor guy is never going to have a chance, but then he spins it and uses it to his benefit. But unfortunately, then he's in a situation where can he win because nobody sees him as a
Right.
threat until he says, "Hi, by the way, I am a threat and let me tell you all the reasons why," before he gets to the final 3. And so I really do feel for Andy because trying to find that balance in the game that he was playing seems very, very difficult. And I think he tried to maneuver through it exceptionally well, but he was in such a tough spot knowing that Sue and Tini and Rachel just thought he was a flipper, and they were like, Andy just flipped, so whatever, like we're not going to give him the credit for this because it wasn't that impressive. And then when you have everybody saying, well, it's kind of a happy accident, so okay, he's still not getting credit for this
Hmm.
incredible Operation Italy that they came up with. So I can understand his frustration, but also, like, how do you find that balance in that type of
Well,
circumstance?
yeah. I mean, you have to find it is the answer,
Yeah.
but it's like walking a tightrope across the Grand
Mm-hmm.
Canyon. Now, it's funny because this episode began with Genevieve telling Andy this was 1,000% his move, and she would tell everyone. And I was like, uh-oh. I thought this was going to end up being a callback to when Gabe told her that the soul move was all hers, and she ended up
Yes.
becoming the target because of it.
Mm-hmm.
But that disappeared. It turned into a big nothing. Like she said that, and then they immediately switched to telling Tini it was an accident.
Yeah, when that happened, I thought, okay, well, now no one's really going to know how
Right.
this came about. So maybe they were all expecting to just announce it in the final 3. This is actually what we did.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. And, so obviously everything changed after that.
Mhm.
I said a few minutes ago, I said he did a great job in this role. Dot, 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 until,
Yes.
because making the big Operation Italy move was great. But as we discussed in the second rule, talking about the big
Mhm.
Operation Italy move was not so great. And it
Right.
made his threat level skyrocket to the person that mattered the most.
Yes. Mhm.
Um, so yeah, it comes back like you said, or it's the balance, and
Mhm.
so now Genevieve's threat level also similarly shot up after her big move of taking out Saul. And just as I said earlier, the impact of it didn't hit her as quickly because there were other things that intervened there. Um, we thought that she would get knocked out right away, but then
Mm.
no. And then I thought, and then I thought, and then I thought,
And then you
yeah.
thought, and then you
Um,
thought.
but I mean, it was a combination of other juicier targets and other moves that kept her
Yeah.
around. But as she said at an earlier tribal council, once you get that stamp of threat, it doesn't wash off. Nobody forgot about her. She wasn't able to, you know, she wasn't able to pull an alligabler and sink back under the water,
Yes, which is what she wanted to do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they knew what she was capable of. She had shown her intelligence and her strategic ability, and the others didn't want that coming at them again. As Caroline told Dalton Ross last week, Genevieve, from our perspective, was the biggest threat in the game.
What I think is fascinating, though, is she and Andy kind of seem to be in completely different places in this particular rule because
Mhm.
she was like, why am I so much of a threat? Like she was struggling with this and she thought Sam was a bigger threat than she was. She did not think that she would like Rachel. She's like,
Mhm.
well, I don't understand why everyone's looking at me. It was almost like she was self-deprecating, right? We're like, I'm not really that significant and important, and I'm not really that much of a threat, but people keep telling me I am and
Mhm.
keep reminding me that I am. Whereas you have Andy who's like, "No, no, please, I am a threat. Look at me. Do you see me? I'm a threat. You need to see it." And so I just think it was interesting that they both found themselves in completely different ends of the spectrum when they were both threats, but one was like, "No, I'm not." And the other one's like, "Please, I am." Yeah.
Should have been like a Freaky Friday situation. They swapped
Right.
bodies.
Yeah, right? Can we swap for a minute? And he's like, "Can I just be Genevieve for one day so I know
Yeah.
what it feels like for
Yeah.
everybody to talk about how much of a threat I am as opposed to telling me I'm a what was the burger? What kind of burger
Nothing
was
burger.
he? A nothing burger. Yeah, and that's kind of a hard thing to hear. You're a nothing burger. Yeah, but
Yeah.
Genevieve was not a nothing burger.
No. No. She was a burger, a something burger. I don't know.
She was an everything burger.
An
Like
everything burger.
all the fixins.
Big Mac? I don't know.
You just called Genevieve a Big Mac.
I know. At least I didn't call her a Whopper. Um,
Oh
so
goodness, I'm sorry, Genevieve.
yeah.
This is what you
Um,
get for being a threat.
that's right. That's right. We know she can't be a Whopper because Whoppers are flame broiled and she didn't practice fire. But
Oh, that's a bit of a burn.
oh,
She's
burn. Ah,
been we're just so funny.
yes.
She did say she thought that she would do very well in the fire making at
Yeah, I
4.
think
She's
but
so
I think she said that in a joking fashion.
mm,
So
in a jest.
mhm. All right. Well, we can return to our usual flow with the first and most important rule, which is to scheme and plot. Now, we know both Andy and Genevieve did well here. Andy, in particular, was doing a lot that most people didn't see, as we've been discussing,
Mhm.
and he was perfectly happy with that for most of the game. He was telling us over and over again, like all he needed. I mean, he had the twirly hair. He needed like a twirly mustache, as he
He
said.
did.
I'm controlling the game, and they just don't know. Um,
Mhm.
but eh, you know, as soon as shortly after his issues at that first challenge, Andy rebounded by getting in good with Sam and Sierra and,
Mhm.
being willing to sacrifice John. He he worked hard to stick with them for a while. As he told Dalton Ross in a mid-game interview that it was his only path and he had to quote just cling on and get to the next phase of the game because that is
Mhm.
where all my options would finally open up. Now, some of those options stemmed from what the others saw in that first challenge, but he also made specific moves to make them believe he was a piece to be scooped up, such as telling Caroline and Tini at the journey that he was in a bad spot with his own tribe.
Yes. Mhm. Yeah, everything that he ended up doing was very calculated,
Yes.
and it wasn't necessarily clear to all of us even watching that this is what he was doing, because there was a little bit of head scratching. Like, is he really like
Hmm.
what he believes he is, or is he really just kind of being carried along, and we can't tell. But it turns out it was a plan, and it was calculated, and
Hmm.
these were decisions that he was making in order to further his game. So that is like long term strategizing, right? You're not,
Right.
it's not just like one day, like you are going every single day creating this narrative. And he talked so much about perception, which I thought was fantastic, because we've
Yes.
talked about that so often, that perception is reality, and he understood wholeheartedly how they perceived him.
Hmm.
And he realized, this is going to get me further in the game. I need to like lean in hardcore on this because it's going to help me. And so that had to have been a very hard thing for him, because you're hearing things about yourself that you don't want to hear, like you're a
Right.
nothing burger. But in the end, it's kind of like the last laugh. Like, he's going to get the last laugh if he can make it that far. So he really did dig in. And I mean, this is scheming and plotting at a different level. And I'm really impressed, because I wasn't seeing it at the beginning. I thought, this guy's got to
Yeah.
go. Like, he's just going to, he's going to end up causing issues and being a problem. But in the end, he was playing his game the best way that he could, considering the circumstances he was in.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, then, once he got to the merge, we talked in earlier podcasts about how he built a web of different alliances like Brian Heideck and
Mhm.
wanted to be a pendulum like Will Wall. He didn't use those names. That's me. He had good relationships with a lot of players, which gave him those different options. So when his name came up as a backup vote and Saul told him that Sam was the one who put it out there, Andy saw how that added to other little hints that told him he wasn't so tight with Sam and Sierra anymore.
Mm,
Uh,
mhm.
as he said at the time, Sam and Sierra still feel like they own me. They have me in their pockets. They look at me as an expendable piece and as sort of a weak player. For me, that's enough to just cut bait. Like, goodbye. And
Mm.
then he, of course, had his she's all that transformation and moved on. As he told Mike Bloom, he knew that by acting like he was a low threat, other people would bring him in on plans. That gave him the ability to have some swing vote power while he waited for the right time to make his big move, which, of course, was Operation Italy.
Right.
He came up with a plan. He did a great job acting to his fellow underdog alliance members, and he played into the image they all had of him, as we discussed last week.
Mhm. Yeah, really just some impressive gameplay.
Yeah. Now, Genevieve had a different path. She was quiet in the early days, and it turned out that she discussed in interviews she had been sick. But when she started going, she definitely made her mark. We saw how, and already discussed a little bit, how she turned things against Kishan when she realized that targeting Rome at that point was not in her best interest. She was able to make that decision because she had good relationships with the people in her tribe, except really Saul. So she could choose which of them would be most advantageous for her going forward.
And she was also very good at realizing her place, because
Hmm.
quickly she had recognized, I'm not anyone's second. And even though we thought that maybe she was Rome's second,
Right.
she was looking at the information that was being shared, and it was being shared with Tini, and then it was being shared with Kashan, and then it was being shared with Genevieve.
Hmm.
And so she said, I am not as important as I thought I was to Rome and to the rest of the individuals in this group." And so she really did utilize that information to put herself in a better position, which is why she ended up targeting Kashan. So her game was so like multifaceted, because it wasn't just linear. There was all of these permutations and these levels and things that she was considering. And she did it in a way on that Keyshawn vote that didn't really upset people either, which
Right.
was really, I mean, it upset Keyshawn, but yeah, of course, right? But it didn't upset the other people that were in the tribe
I
with
mean,
her. They
Tini,
it
Keyshawn had
well,
been
it ups
Tini's number one, but
and that is true,
Tini got
but
over it.
she managed to fix things with Teeny, and
Right.
so I do think that Genevieve was thinking through all of these steps when she was making a decision, but she was making the decision because she saw a path that would get her to a particular place, and it wasn't just about, "I need to make a move." It
Hmm.
was, "There's a legitimate concern for my game right now with this particular circumstance, and I need to fix it before it becomes too big and I can't fix it.
Yeah. Yeah, once Genevieve then got to the merge, she saw when it was time to turn on Rome and then went from there. As we discussed in the second rule, she eventually came to the decision that Saul had to go. She told Rob that her strategy was to get rid of people who connected well with others but weren't working with her, and that's a good. It's a good strategy. It made
Mm-hmm.
sense, therefore, to target Saul. Just you know, like I said, not when and how she did it. Um, when she went to work, she did it well. Telling Sue that Saul was going after Gabe, knowing what reaction that would cause from Sue, and she kept it so hidden in the moment that Sam and Saul and others thought they could count on her to flip the vote back, even though she was the one who had started it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, again, this is her ability to read the room and to figure out how to get to that point.
Mm-hmm.
But then I do think that she had some help because she did have people like Gabe who
Well,
were
right,
obviously supporting this because they thought, well, now this is going to make her a target. So
right,
kudos to me. This will be
yeah,
great because I'm just going to tell everybody she did it and it'll be awesome. But she certainly did work through that, even though it was probably too soon.
mm,
She had her reasons for doing it. It wasn't just a knee jerk reaction. She thought through the
right,
reasons and defended those reasons when she was explaining why she voted him out at the time that she did.
yeah. The thing was, after that point, she became the target, and it was hard to get anything going. As she told
Yeah.
Mike Bloom, I had influence, but no authority in this game. I had no numbers with me aside from Sam, and we were the minority. So my strategy couldn't be long term and based on building things. It had to be very circumstantial, based on what was happening in the moment, because
Hmm.
I didn't have the infrastructure around me to do long term planning.
Right.
So, yeah, she made it from vote to vote. Her legend kind of grew with each passing day. But then after Operation Italy, all she could do was rely on her supposed idol until, of course, Sam revealed that it was fake.
Right.
We talked about when Tini questioned her, she admitted it again for reasons we'll get into in Rule 4. And then, you know, tried to kind of turn it into a question of whether or not she was telling the truth once she saw the reactions of Sue and Rachel. But she was pretty well doomed in that attempt because, as we mentioned, only Teeny was actually at risk. So the other two
Right.
could target her without fear.
Sure. Mhm.
All right. Well, we can go to the third rule, which tells players to be flexible. Jessica, how do you think Andy did in terms of this rule?
I think he did great. And I mean, I would say Genevieve did great as well. I'll just throw them both out there because I do think that we've spent a lot of time talking about Andy and his need to shift his game almost
Mm-hmm.
immediately and figure out how it was going to work for him. Andy was always looking for the other option, and he was doing it in a way that nobody was suspicious about what he was doing
Mm-hmm.
because he was having conversations with everyone, he was gathering information, he was letting people treat him as a number and letting people treat him as an additional vote that they would need to pull off whatever plan that they were creating. So he was part of it, but he was willing to do all of the extra legwork he needed to do in order to fix the situation that had been created for him so early on in the game. So I think Andy really did a fantastic job at being flexible for sure. He was
Yeah,
always looking for options.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we've discussed quite a bit already that it was a major part of his strategy. Especially at the merge, he came in with Sam and Sierra, but knew he had to jump ship when he started feeling
Mhm.
suspicious of them. He even told Gordon Holmes that it started earlier when he noticed them keeping secrets that they didn't need to keep, and it seemed like they were spending more time with Rachel than with him. So, he was picking up on these things. He had his finger on the pulse of what was going on, which is also
Mhm.
part of this rule. And then, as we discussed, he branched out. Now, he also talked to us essentially about flexibility in that confessional where he discussed being a numbers guy, but recognizing he couldn't just algorithmically determine the correct path because
Mm.
people
Mhm.
have different priorities.
Sure.
And so he was going to use, his relationships and arrange the pieces how he wanted on the game board.
Mhm.
Now, you already said also your thoughts on Genevieve.
Yeah, I mean, Genevieve was someone who, and I mentioned previously, was reading the room so well and figuring out the relationships and where people were and what type of relationship she had with these individuals and where did she fall in that pecking order, if you will. And she was willing to take out Kishan, who was someone she was actually working with very closely, so much so that I trusted you, Genevieve. That was, the comment that we heard him say, but she
Over and over
knew
again, as it
over and
turned out.
over. Yes, but she knew that she needed to do that for her game at that point in time, and she mentioned so many times there it was the Genevieve the person and Genevieve the player, and so she was trying very hard to make the moves that Genevieve the player needed to make, and so I do think that she was keeping all of her options open, and even found Sam so much later in the game,
Mhm.
but then realized that she could utilize Sam and that she could play with Sam. And when Andy all of a sudden appeared and Operation Italy came up, she was certainly not opposed to trying something different with another player. So I think overall she did an excellent job as well.
Yeah, I will say, I think she was being very flexible to the point of the move against Saul. I think once she did that, her flexibility pretty much went out the window because she became isolated as a target.
Sure.
I mean, she had those other people you mentioned, but that was more out of necessity than planning.
Yeah.
So she tried a few things, but none of them were really going to pan out for her at that point.
But she also could have just tried to throw in the towel too, right? If she gets to
Well,
that point
yeah, I
where
mean,
like, oh, like what am I going to do at this point?
I mean,
But she didn't do that.
not throwing in the towel is my base level, of,
Oh, and I
you
understand,
know,
but she certainly was willing to consider all
right,
options
right,
and didn't just decide that it's too late for her. I mean, she
yeah,
was she was considering any possibility that she could, and why would she not? It's a game for
right,
$1,000,000.
exactly. All right. Well, the fourth rule tells players not to let their emotions control them. I've already dropped a few hints that we'd have some things to say about both players' decisions here. To start with Andy again, we discussed at length in the second rule how he made his big mistake because he needed people to respect him and his game. And that's an emotional reaction.
Mm,
Yes, he needed people to respect his game once he got to final tribal council. But anything other than that goes beyond the game. He told Rachel that he wasn't telling her to convince her to lobby for him in the jury, but rather because he respected her and wanted her to respect him. Now, I know, that could have been BS because, of course, he wanted her to be his advocate in the jury. But he
sure.
also said in interviews that not being respected hurt after a while, even though he knew he had been purposely
Mm-hmm.
making people think that way.
Right.
Um, as he told Gordon Holmes, people you live with all the time thinking poorly of you starts to wear on you and you start to get emotional about it.
Mm-hmm.
And we had seen him have these emotional flashes leading up to this point, such as when Genevieve told Rachel she thought Andy was just being dragged along. And he told us, I'm sick of it. I'm sick of being underestimated in this game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I can understand why that would wear on a person because
Mm-hmm.
you want the respect, but also Andy had kind of put himself in this situation
Right.
too, right? So it's again trying to find that balance. You want to save your game because of the situation that you now exist in because of what happened on day 3, but then you have to live that every single day, and you have to own a portion of yourself you might not want to, and you have to act like you are a way that you don't want to be, and this isn't the survivor game you necessarily
Mm-hmm.
wanted to be playing. So yeah, I can understand why that would wear on him, but if you've committed, you got to commit all the way to the
Right.
finale. Like, you just got to commit all the way down to the final 3.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a cop going undercover as a drug dealer and then being
Mhm.
upset that all the people he meets think he's a drug dealer.
Right.
You know, I mean,
That's a great analogy.
it's like, yeah, it sucks that they think you're the scum, but that's kind of the role you signed up for.
You did a
Eh,
great job pretending.
Right, right. And I'm not saying Andy is scum. I'm saying drug dealers. But I mean, Andy, he he kept saying, "I want them to think I'm not doing anything," and then they'd be like, "Well, you're not doing anything," and it's like,
You're a nothing burger.
yeah. Um, and I did mention previously on the podcast that for a while I was confused about Andy's edit because we saw him making game moves and he talked intelligently to us about the game in confessionals.
Mm-hmm.
But it was also clear that the other players thought Andy was good to bring to the end because he wasn't a threat. Now, over
Right.
the past few episodes and in his interviews, we learned more about that. I I don't know why it was important for them to show at the time, but now I see it. This was what drove, sorry, I didn't know at the time when I was talking about it then.
Mm-hmm.
But this was, it turns out, what drove Andy into making his biggest mistake in the game.
Right. And that was telling Rachel. Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure.
So as for Genevieve, she had a different relationship with emotions throughout the game. You might even call it a roller coaster. She came in wanting to play without emotions. Then she made some emotional connections. Then she felt bad about voting out Kishan and decided she would rather be a villain than a friend who killed someone's dreams. Now, this rule, of course, says you should separate your emotions from your game. But Genevieve went a step further and basically tried to remove all emotions like she was a Vulcan. Uh, you know, but that didn't work either because she realized that without any emotional connections at all, it might be easier for her to vote out other people, but it was also easier for them to vote her out.
Right. And it's
So,
really hard when you don't have relationships to then
yeah,
formulate plans with people and feel like you are connected in some way, that they owe you their I don't know,
something
support.
loyalty,
Yes,
support, yeah,
loyalty.
anything.
Yes. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, she eventually circled back to what this rule is really about, which is to make your strategic moves without considering emotion in the equation. It was more difficult for her than she expected it to be, but she finally got there.
Yeah, and I do, and I've already mentioned it once, but the Genevieve the person versus Genevieve the player, and I do think that this was a very real struggle for her throughout the
Mhm.
game, because she realized, oh God, it doesn't feel good when you vote someone out that you care about. Oh, that's unfortunately the game of Survivor.
Yeah.
And yeah, you can't remove all of the emotional part of yourself when you are making these decisions, because we're all human, we're not robots, but when you're dealing with a game for $1,000,000, you have to be able to know when to separate and know that
Mhm.
that's just gonna be part of your game.
Right. Right. Now, in her last episode, this comes back to when she did get let emotions interfere because we've already discussed this a bit. The decision she made to tell Tini the truth about her fake idol was a purely emotional one. We
Mm,
didn't see it in the episode, but she said in interviews that the discussion was much, much longer, and Tini got much, much, much more upset with her.
yeah,
As she told Mike Bloom, in that moment, I was unprepared. The player went to the side, and the person was like, "Oh my God, I care so much about Tini. I just wanted to stop them feeling distressed." Now, we
yeah.
mentioned earlier that her telling Teeny the truth about this might or might not have played a real role in the eventual vote, but it really shouldn't have been an issue to worry about, except that, again, Genevieve just got caught in that emotional roller coaster of hers.
Yeah, and I do think that at that point in the game, because she's cut herself off so much from so many
Mm-hmm.
people, I mean, Tina she had been with since the beginning, and so the relationship that she had with Teeny was something that involved a lot of lies throughout the game. And that was something that I think was wearing on Genevieve as well. That Teeny is very upset about this component.
Mm-hmm.
And Genevieve is revisiting in her mind, I've lied to Teeny a lot throughout this game, and realizing that that's probably not making Teeny feel good in this moment either. And so I do think that all of that probably just came to a head for Genevieve in that moment, because Teeny really had been with Genevieve from the start.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, both players were kind of in extreme situations of emotion, but Survivor can be an extreme game,
Oh, for sure.
you know?
Yeah.
All right. Well, the fifth rule reminds players they need to pretend to be nice and play the social game. Now, judging from what we saw on the show, I think both players did pretty well here. Nobody was lashing out at them because they were mad. Well, maybe other than Sue, but that happened whenever anyone did something she didn't like, like playing the game. Um, Even as other players fought to get them out, they still compared Andy to a brother and Genevieve to a close friend or to Voldemort, but Voldemort in a nice way. Um, you know, what
Oh,
do
what
you?
a comparison.
Yeah, what do you think of how they did in this rule?
Well, I do think that okay, to Andy's credit, we have to give Andy the most credit we possibly can in this particular rule, because what we saw of Andy right off the bat, and I certainly don't want to speak ill of Andy, but I mean, in that moment, the
Mm-hmm.
hand holding that went on and that felt necessary in order to keep Andy happy,
Mm-hmm.
because like they weren't clapping when he opened a coconut, and all of these things. As someone from the outside looking in and watching this, I was like, "Oh god, that would be to live with that 24/7 would be terrible." So there had to have been something about Andy that made it desirable, not just to keep him around because of votes, but also setting aside that part of him. And maybe it was because they're like, well, he feels like my little brother. So
Mm-hmm.
so really there had to have been something that Andy was able to do to make people want to keep him for vote purposes, but also a willingness to bring him along, knowing that they thought he needed to have such hand-holding. And so I would imagine that there had to have been another component to Andy, and he certainly seemed very kind and very sweet when he was interacting with each person individually, and was also willing to show his loyalty in ways like, "You can take my shot in the dark, you can have it."
Right.
I mean, and so he was willing to put himself out there so much. So I think overall, Andy had to have had something really working for him because people were willing to work with him. And then Genevieve, even though she was trying to separate her emotions from the game, she was still able to connect with people and bring people together who had not been wanting to work together. When you had Saul and Rome, who were just like at odds and really despising each other, and she was somehow able to like bring them to the table and have them actually go through a vote together and work together, I think speaks volumes of her ability to connect with people and to have a social connection, and speak to people not just about the game, but like, let's like make a connection here, and let's really look past like some petty issue here, and let's really work together. So I think overall she was great here too. Like there's no way you could pull off something like that if people didn't genuinely feel something for you and feel like they wanted to work with you.
Yeah, I'd say for Andy, in when he was still in Gata, I do think it was pretty much. I mean, there was the John vote, of course, but then there was only one more vote.
Sure.
And it was that he was on the side of Sam and Sierra, and
Right.
and so I do think it was that. But after that, I think he went one step further in terms of his use of the social aspect within his game, because we heard from Caroline in her interviews last week that Andy talked about his emotions a lot and emphasized that he felt comfortable with certain people. And
Mm,
this
mhm.
played on other people's emotions and also caused them to underestimate him. And it
Mm.
really was using the social game as a weapon.
Yes. Yes. I think that's a great way to phrase it. That's what Andy was doing for
Yeah.
sure.
Now, I think Genevieve kind of seemed to view the social game as something to be feared. We talked about that emotional roller coaster, and part of it was having to befriend and deal with players who she knew she would have to try to vote out.
Sure.
She, of course, openly talked about trying to keep them at arm's length, which, that was an interesting choice in and of itself, to not just doing it, but actually admitting it in tribal council.
Yeah.
Um, but even with that said, I don't think it ended up impacting her game overall. I think she
Right.
talked about it more than she actually did it.
Yes, I think there was a natural inclination for people to wanna gravitate towards her. So
Mhm.
she was receptive, even though she didn't want to be. That it wasn't a matter of pushing people away and not wanting anything to do with them. I think she was definitely struggling with that part of the game, but not to her detriment.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, the seventh rule covers idols and advantages in game mechanics. And of course, the most obvious aspect of this rule is something we already discussed, that Andy should have considered that Rachel could have an idol. But since we
Mhm.
already hammered on that for a while, I don't think there's much more to be said about
We
that. Do
did.
you?
No, we hammered on that a lot.
Okay. So Andy had other interactions with an idol way back at Gata when Sam was supposed to be babysitting him and he went off and found the beware advantage, but decided not to actually take it.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
At the time, I wondered about the wisdom of this decision because it was clear he was already on the bottom. So why not go for it? But as
Mhm.
we saw his game progress, and then as he explained in some interviews, he felt like his best path forward was with Sam and Sierra, and losing his vote would hurt his ability to work with them. I mean, what
Mhm.
good is keeping someone around for their vote if they don't have their vote?
Right. And that is a very fair point. Mhm.
As for Genevieve, of course, she had the fake idol that she made with Sam, and she and Sam and Andy all did a good job of selling that, and it worked. It could have kept working, except Rachel had to go and win immunity, and so
Damn
that
it, Rachel.
I know, and then Sam had to go and tell Tini about it being fake in order to save himself. Um, you
Damn
know,
it, Sam.
yes. And then it circles back to the discussion we had in the fourth rule about Genevieve admitting it to Tini when confronted.
Yeah.
Go ahead, say it. Damn it, Genevieve.
Damn it, Genevieve.
Yes. Now, there's just one more thing I wanted to mention in this rule. I think Genevieve purposely got herself voted out before Final Four fire making because she knew, of course, that she had been playing video games instead of practicing. And this way it never came into play. So no one could ever criticize her for that.
That is a very deep, deep like, accusation. I mean, that's a lot. You really want to do that? Because I don't know how Genevieve would necessarily feel about that. That's going real
Genevieve.
deep. Genevieve. I'm still fascinated that she played that many hours of a video game and didn't practice fire, but I've already complained about that enough.
Yes, yes. All right, so we can move on to Appendix A, which is about the players keeping their end goals in mind when voting, and we talk about voting out the weak, then the strong, then the weak, then the strong. Now, at this point in the game, players should still be voting out the strong threats who are also weak links in terms of being allies. In this case, I can't really say there are any particularly strong alliances in the game,
Mm-hmm.
so that aspect doesn't really come into play. But obviously, we discussed how Andy convinced Rachel that he was the biggest threat left out there,
Yeah.
aside from Genevieve, who was immune for that vote. And then, well, she wasn't immune the next vote. So that made things pretty
Mm-hmm.
straightforward as far as this appendix is concerned.
Yes, I would agree wholeheartedly.
Now, I do think Rachel has set herself up well for the end game, which is
Mm-hmm.
really what this appendix is all about. If she can get there with Sue and Tini, she should have an easy victory.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Even if Sam makes it as well, not to jump ahead to predictions, but I still think she'll beat him pretty handily based on what we've seen.
I know we're gonna get to predictions, so
Mhm.
maybe I'll just hold off and
Okay.
say things then.
Now, as for Sue and Teeny and how they've been doing in preparing for the end game, I, I don't know who they could have beaten going back a number of votes. So, unless they had done something drastically different in the interim, it wouldn't have really mattered.
I know the one thing we didn't really mention, but Sue's play of her idol, which is really kind of
I mean, we didn't mention it for a reason. We could mention it in the post finale podcast, but I think all we'll have to say when we get to rule 7 for her is she kept it secret and then she played it.
the last time that she got.
I mean, it did benefit, I'm jumping ahead to next week, but it did benefit her because then she could safely vote for Genevieve, whether or not Genevieve had the idol.
Sure,
It's
sure.
just that nobody on the jury is going to know that's what she did.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
you know,
She could have used it on Teeny.
And why would she do that?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yes. All right. Well, we can move to Appendix B, which discusses the jury phase, including preparing yourself for being in Final Three and also preparing the jury to want to vote for you. Of course, way back when we talked about Rule 2, I mentioned that Andy was in a tug of war between that and this appendix. And it was a good idea to plant seeds in an influential juror's head and let her become his spokesperson, especially since, as he told Mike Bloom, from the perspective of Rachel and Sue and Tini, it was not a masterful move that raised my threat level. It was
Hmm.
perceived as a sort of this weak willed, impulsive flip that handed Genevieve the game. But of course, the problem was that it presumed she would actually be going to the jury.
Yeah.
Like we discussed earlier, he needed to find a way to show he'd had a big impact on the game without also showing he'd become the biggest threat in the game at that moment in time.
Right. The struggle is real.
Yes, yes. The tightrope walk is
Mm-hmm.
I also want to mention something that I discussed in an earlier podcast, and this was that I liked Andy saying they wanted to defeat big threats a few tribal councils ago, before the final three. And this made a lot of sense when it came to avoiding situations of people talking about the threats going to the end together or something like that. Um, it doesn't happen all that often anymore, but people do talk about it here and there. And there was some mention of it even in this season, though, of course, like usual, it was the threats themselves trying to stay in the game. Like, oh, we should all stick together and, you know,
Yeah.
go to
Yeah.
the end. You don't want to take out the threats early. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And then you do, and then you're the
Right.
next one to go.
Right.
Yeah.
Um, as for Genevieve, well, I mentioned earlier that she acknowledged she had influence but not power, uh, and was just trying to keep going in the game after the Saul vote. She said in interviews that it was a surprise to her when she joined the jury and found out they thought she could have won. This goes back to that self deprecating thing you said earlier.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that was even though there was all this talk about it coming down to her versus Rachel. So I don't know if she's just naturally modest or what, but it didn't seem like she was particularly doing anything to prepare for facing the jury other than being herself and trying to get there, which was, about all she could do after the backlash from her big move.
Yes. No, I agree very much.
All right. Well, with that, it is about time to wrap things up. What are your final thoughts on Andy and Genevieve?
I find both Andy and Genevieve to be such fascinating players because they played such different games, but became really like on an even playing field in the end, which I think is fascinating because you have two individuals that came into this game, one being a super fan, Andy, one not calling herself a super fan, but like I watched all the episodes. So like I was very familiar with it. And Andy just like, I'm gonna take this moment for everything I can, and this could be so amazing and so great. And Genevieve being like, I played, 30 hours of video games instead of practicing fire, but I can do this. So it's like they both came in with such different, like, I don't know, just approaches to this game. And I remember thinking Andy might be a little too much and Genevieve isn't going to be enough. And one of the things that Genevieve said in her pregame interviews was that she called herself bouncy. And I was like, I don't see it. I don't know what you're talking about. But Andy, I saw so much of Andy. And so then once the season actually started and we had Andy day 3 in this meltdown and just all of this horrific stuff happening to him right away, I was like, here we go. Andy's going to be a lot. And Genevieve, who? She wasn't even there. And so it really like was reflected in their pregame interviews, I believe, to what we were seeing on the screen. And then all of a sudden, it was like this weird like shift happened and they both morphed into these incredible players that like we didn't see coming. Andy figured out I need to save my game and the idea that I had for my perfect survivor game isn't going to happen. That got messed up on day 3. Now I need to adapt. I need to figure out what to do. I need to save myself and save my game. In order to do so, I'm leaning in hardcore to the perception that people have of me. Genevieve didn't realize what people were going to perceive her as because she was so quiet and because she was present, paying attention, but not trying to make a big scene, not necessarily trying to get noticed until she got noticed. And once she got noticed, as you've already said, once you're labeled a threat, you can't wash that off. And she didn't even realize that that's what she was doing. So much so that when she goes to Ponderosa and people are telling her, you could have won, she's like, what are you talking about? So she's still blissfully unaware of how great of a player she became. And I think that's just reflective of who she is as a person. She's very calculated, she's methodical, and she works through all of the issues. She sees what she needs to do and she figures out how to get it done without thinking she needs to be flashy about it. And so, even though they played completely different games, they were kind of playing the same game. Andy didn't want to be flashy, but he knew in the end they needed to see him. Genevieve didn't want to be flashy, but they saw her anyway. And so it was just this fascinating thing to watch them both play and end up being seen as such huge threats, but getting there in a completely different way. So unfortunately, they really did kind of cause their own demise just by being so good at playing the game. So kudos to both of them for just being so awesome. Really unexpected players all around. I'm very impressed with you both and such a great time watching you. So thank you so much for putting it all out there. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, I really enjoyed seeing Andy and Genevieve play, and both of them had very interesting and different story arcs, like you said. But they also had similarities in some of the reasons they were voted out. Despite the worries of some players or some viewers, Andy made the right move with Operation Italy to flip and still managed to keep his threat level low in the immediate aftermath. We often talk about the tallest poppy being cut down, and Andy became that poppy. But it wasn't because of the move he made. The problem was he added a bunch of fertilizer and water to his own roots and suddenly sprouted high above all the others while Rachel was trying to figure out who to chop. Similarly, Genevieve was riding along fine until she made the move against Saul. Unlike Andy's later move, hers was never secret, and everyone knew it was all her from the moment she brought it up. As soon as Saul was gone, the target turned to her, even if it was delayed a bit. So both Andy and Genevieve were labeled as threats, and in both cases, it was due to their own actions. Genevieve made her move against Saul too soon and too obviously. After that, as she said, she couldn't wash off the threat stamp, and she also couldn't get a solid footing in the game. It was only a matter of time. Andy, on the other hand, survived making his move without being labeled as a threat until he labeled himself that way. It was a combination of his emotions finally getting to him after he made all the strategic moves he did, but kept them quiet to the point that nobody realized it, along with his miscalculation that Rachel wouldn't have an idol, and even if she did, the target would be Sam. It would have been interesting to see if he could have used those same powers to convince the jury in a final tribal council, because I think he had a good chance to win. After all, he convinced Rachel to change her mind about him. So he might have been able to do the same to the whole jury. He
Right.
just did it too soon.
Yeah.
In that way, Andy and Genevieve were similar. Genevieve's big move that went awry was taking out Saul. Andy's wasn't Operation Italy, but rather explaining his whole role in it and the game overall to Rachel. Both of them did it too soon and didn't properly calculate what the backlash would be. And that is why Andy and Genevieve lost.
There we are.
Yes.
Now we're going to do like a to be continued. There's no end. We're just waiting.
To be continued. I will say I was surprised that the episode itself didn't. I thought, especially when they had, I should have mentioned this earlier, but by the way, stick around, people, because we are going to have predictions. But
Yes.
I thought, especially the way Tini was dithering, I thought sure
Yes.
we were going to go
Yes.
back and forth, back and forth.
Yep.
And then there was a moment where it like went to black for a second.
Uh-huh.
And I thought it was going to be continued.
Yeah, like that's it. End scene. Yeah.
And we'd only talking about Andy today. But so this splits it up a little bit more. Next week, obviously, we will be talking about all of the Final Four, but better
Yes.
Final Four than Final Five.
Mm,
However, before we
thank
talk
you.
about next week, I do want to remind people, in case you've forgotten since the beginning of or earlier in the podcast, that the rules we have discussed are available in poster and T-shirt and
Yes.
checklist form.
And they're
So again,
beautiful.
go to robhasawebsite.com/yxlostfeed, click on it, and especially for the poster, get the sale price.
That's right. Get that sale price. And you can also find us on various social media locations. I am at Jessica Lewis 89 on Twitter and also on Blue Sky. Same thing at Jessica Lewis 89. I'm on Instagram at Jessica Lewis 6789. But I am not as socially out there as my co-host here, David Bloomberg, who is all over the place. YouTube, Blue Sky, Twitter, you name it, he has it. He'll put it out there, all of this content. TikTok, come on, this guy does it all. He has a link tree so everyone can find him easily in all of the places that he is because it is everywhere.
Yes, you can find me at Linktree/David Bloomberg. There's a dot before the EE in the URL there. You can find me more directly on Blue Sky as at David Bloomberg. You mentioned Twitter. I'm barely on Twitter anymore. I encourage everyone to get the hell off of Twitter. But like I said, I'll still post some links there and stuff. I'm also on Threads as at David Bloomberg TV. So like I said, join us on Blue Sky. It's fun. You also mentioned the video platforms YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram, where I'm at David Bloomberg TV. I post 2 or more videos per day, and mostly, of course, clips from Survivor, especially now because almost everything else is gone.
Yeah.
So, we've got this week worth of Survivor. We've got next week finale worth of Survivor. We head into the holidays, and I will keep posting right through the holidays there. It'll be stuff from the finale, the Survivor finale, until I run out of things, and then we will move to old time Survivor flashbacks. I have a whole bunch of them ready. Who knows? One could be Jessica in the sand snake.
God damn
But
it.
so we'll
This is
see.
my You know what? That is such a terrible thing because it's like one of my favorite memories of my interactions with Jeff Probst, but then
Mhm.
also one of my least favorite moments on the show. So
Yes.
just
Yes.
putting that out there.
And the video doesn't have the part that you're talking that was your favorite.
No, the
That was
best part isn't even
yep.
captured.
So
Gosh, it's so frustrating. So frustrating.
all right. Now it's time for predictions as we head into the final 4. No more
Yes.
voting people out. Just fire making and final tribal council.
Which is so obnoxious, but we've
Yes.
already yelled about that enough,
Yeah.
so I'll leave it alone.
Not really any hints from a preview other than seeing a small portion of the immunity challenge with players crawling under a net as like the first part of it. Now, last time they had to do that, Sam absolutely killed it.
He did.
Uh,
He did.
then again, if they have to do a puzzle at the end, he can kill it all he wants, and Rachel's going to destroy him.
I know.
Probably.
Hmm.
So we don't really know. What we know from this past episode is we were shown a lot of footage indicating it was between Genevieve and Rachel. Genevieve and Rachel. So with Genevieve gone, it seems like they could have been telegraphing that it was Rachel. They did have some side plots, like Rachel asking Genevieve, if neither of us gets to the end, who wins? And Genevieve responding, it would be Sam.
Mm.
And then we had Sue telling us she was annoyed at Genevieve and Rachel saying they were going to duke it out as the biggest threats. And she wondered, what about the other 3 people? I think Genevieve already answered that part. At the very end of the episode, Jeff said any one of them could win the game. I'm sorry, Jeff. I don't think they can. And I know I talked about how I was absolutely 100% certain that Erica could not win the game. But I really think this is a 2-horse race. Rachel is far in the lead, and then Sam. If Rachel makes it to final 3, I think it's pretty clear she wins. If she doesn't, I think it's pretty clear Sam wins. I mean,
Mhm.
Tini has admitted in front of the jury to often not knowing what was going on.
Right? Yeah, she actually said, I have been here so many times and really
Right.
like and not just like one vote, many votes. Yeah, that's not a good look. Not
Yeah,
a good
and
look.
I just don't think anyone is going to see Sue's game and going, "She deserves to win."
Yeah, no,
Uh
I agree. I agree with that. I am feeling for Rachel because I feel like there has been such a focus on Rachel and there has been this weird undertone with Sam, right? Where like
mhm.
Sam is always there. And Sam is always like finding himself
You make him sound
in the
kinda creepy. Sam is
no,
all
but
there.
yeah, not creepy, but like, but you know what? Like, it's like one of those situations where like Sam has throughout the entire season, they've been giving Sam like content about some things that you're like, well, that's
Yes.
interesting that they are necessarily including that. And I do feel like we're building to this moment where it was Rachel or Genevieve, and that's who it was going to be. And so I'm very curious and thinking maybe she's not gonna make it to the final 3, and maybe
Well,
it's gonna be a Sam, Teenie, Sue combination.
yeah, I've been going back and forth on this, at first, I thought it was just so obvious that Rachel would win, so of course she wouldn't. I mean, we've seen the so-called obvious winner get knocked out in fire making before. Hello,
Yes.
Jesse, as just one example. Um,
Right.
but then it would still be obviously Sam if that happens. So
Mhm.
there still wouldn't be any more suspense. The
Sure.
only way that there's any shred of suspense is if Sam and Rachel both make it to final 3. And even
Right.
then, I
Mhm.
still think Rachel wins fairly easily. Um,
But in that moment, so if and I hate that we even have to work through this, but
mhm.
if Sam ends up winning the final immunity challenge and then has to choose who's playing with him and then who's going to make fire, there was a discussion about who was good at making fire and who
I mean,
was not.
everybody
2
believes that
people.
Rachel is the best fire maker.
Okay, so she is the person that they believe is the best fire
Right.
maker.
But
Okay.
if that's the only way Sam has to try to get rid of her, he may try to put someone against. I mean, we know Sue has been working on the fires. That's why she always has soot all over her face.
Yes.
So maybe he puts Sue against her there,
That would
you
be
know.
interesting, right?
Um and I agree with you. We have gotten a lot of confessionals from Sam, including
Mhm.
stuff we didn't need to.
Yes. Yeah.
Uh so it I don't know. But we also got stuff about Rachel. Because think back to the players talking about Rachel being a huge threat earlier in the game, right after
Oh,
merge.
yeah.
When
Like
we
they
the
did
view
with Erica.
yeah, well, the viewers were like, why are you saying Rachel is we were saying, why are you
Right.
saying Rachel's a threat?
Right,
There was
right.
to my mind, there was no reason to show it back then unless it would come to fruition.
Yeah.
And so because of that, I've landed on a Rachel win. That is what
Mhm.
I believe. Um, and if that's the case, it will be a fun, amazing winners quote when she says what we saw in the preview, which is my only option is to kick ass.
Yes. And I think Rachel will kick ass. And I have gone back and forth and I've struggled with
Hmm.
who I think is going to win. And it came down to one thing, and that was somebody's name. And I'm going to go with Sam just because my dad's name is Sam.
Okay.
So I'm going to pick Sam
Okay.
because I'm honoring my dad.
Okay.
I think they both are incredible players, and I think that they have both played phenomenal games. But I keep finding myself thinking about Sam because there
Hmm.
there just seems to be this undertone the entire time throughout the season about Sam, and just looking at who's going to be in the jury, and you have Sierra, and you'll have Andy, and I where their loyalties necessarily going to fall. I feel like Sam's got a good shot.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'd be happy with either of them. Sam, uh, you know, fellow Chicago suburbanite, originally, fellow Bears fan, fellow Illini fan. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, but yeah, I just have to go with where I think the edit is taking me.
Oh,
But
for sure.
the edit has lied to us before.
It
Uh,
has.
I do want to say, if Rachel wins, she has you to thank
I
because
know.
you've blamed yourself in the past for cursing players backwards in time by predicting
Yes.
they'd win. But you predicted Rachel would be first out. So logically speaking, if you're going to get the
Mm-hmm.
blame for ruining people's games, you have to get the credit for causing someone to win.
I love this approach. So, Rachel, if you win, you're welcome. That
Yes.
butterfly effect in just
All you.
happening. We're
All you.
making it happen. All
Yes.
me. All me. You're welcome.
All right. Well, as we wrap up, I want to encourage people to check out the RHAP patron program at robhasawebsite.com/patron. You can get access to all the special podcasts that are put out just for patrons, plus Facebook groups and Discord, and of course, support shows like ours and everything on the network at robhasawebsite.com/patron. And make sure you're subscribed to all the RHAP Survivor podcasts by going to weknowsurvivor.com, which you can see, right down there. Um,
Right down there.
it you go to that website, uh you can pick and choose the Survivor podcasts that you want to listen to right there, or select your podcast service of choice to subscribe to, which is the better option. It's a lot easier. You'll find a lot of great content, like of course us, the know-it-alls, the B&B, Survivor International, and much more.
All right. And I would like to thank everyone at RHAP for all of the incredible work that you do. Scott St. Pierre, Jessica Sterling for all of the editing and producing that you do, not only for Why Blank Lost, but all of the content that you just heard David Bloomberg speak of. There are so many options available, so many shows, so many things that you can do, and they just go above and beyond for their patrons. So thank you so much for all the work that you do, and for the staff and team as well at RHAP. You're just fantastic, all of the work. Thank you, Doug, for all of the beautiful art that you can see in front of you if you are watching the video version. It is fantastically beautiful. And then also thank you to Will from America for the song that you hear, not on the video version. So you see the art on the video version, you hear the song on just the, I
It
don't
means
know.
you should listen to it and then go back and watch it.
Do both, exactly. So thank you so much for all of the incredible work. And David, thank you for getting through this. How long? Not quite 2 hours. We
No,
haven't
we
reached.
yeah
No, we
we
did
zipped
well. We did
we
well.
zipped through this one.
We
Yes.
did.
Thank you, as always, Jessica, for another great episode under a different set of very busy circumstances for you.
Yes.
Um,
So many. So
we will
many.
see everyone in about a week for the finale. Now, just be warned, it might come a few hours or a day later than usual because, it's the finale. We'll have 4 people to discuss.
Lots of
Uh,
things.
so, yeah. But once we're there, it won't be too late, just a little tiny bit. So, we will see everyone after the finale. Hope everyone has fun watching it
Mm-hmm.
and talk to you
Enjoy.
soon. Bye.
Bye.